when the mayor's daughter kissed an Apache warrior beneath the silver moon. She didn't just break the rules, she shattered two worlds. In 1875, Silver Creek, where hatred runs deeper than the mines and blood feuds span generations, Isabella Harper's forbidden love with Kaelan would either unite two peoples or destroy them both. Tonight, as war drums echo across the canyon and rifles gleam in the moonlight, their love story becomes a battle cry. Will passion conquer prejudice, or will the bullets fly at dawn? Stay with me until the end of this epic tale. And comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far our story travels across the world. The gunshot that would change everything hadn't been fired yet, but Isabella Harper could feel it coming like thunder before the storm. She pressed her back against the rough bark of the ancient willow, her heart hammering against her ribs as boots thundered past her hiding spot. The night air carried the acrid smell of torches and the bitter taste of fear. Find her. Sheriff Briggs's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. The mayor's daughter doesn't just vanish into thin air. Isabella closed her eyes, remembering how this nightmare had begun just 3 hours earlier, when the world still made sense, and love seemed like something that happened to other people in faraway places. The Harper mansion had been ablaze with light that evening, hosting another one of her father's political gatherings. Mayor Thomas Harper stood at the center of his mahogany-paneled study, gesturing grandly with a crystal tumbler of whiskey as he held court with Silver Creek's most influential men. Isabella had grown tired of listening to their endless debates about Apache raids and territorial expansion from her perch on the velvet settee. "The savages grow bolder by the day," declared Jeremiah Colt, the town's most successful mine owner. His weathered face was flushed with alcohol and righteous anger. "Just last week they struck the Morrison Ranch, burned it to the ground." "We need to show them strength," agreed Dr. Aldrich, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Perhaps it's time to consider Colonel Brennan's proposal for a preemptive strike." Isabella's fingers tightened around her embroidered handkerchief. She had heard these conversations countless times before, each one more violent than the last. The men spoke of the Apache as if they were wild animals rather than human beings with families and dreams of their own. "Isabella, my dear," her father's voice pulled her from her troubled thoughts. "Why don't you play something for our guests? The piano has been silent far too long tonight." She forced a smile and moved to the grand piano in the corner of the room. As her fingers found the familiar keys of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, she let the melancholy melody carry her away from the ugly words and uglier intentions that filled the air around her. But even the music couldn't silence the voice in her head that whispered of injustice and cruelty. At 19, Isabella had spent her entire life within the suffocating confines of Silver Creek society, where women were expected to be ornamental and silent, and where hatred for the Apache was considered as natural as breathing. "Your daughter plays beautifully, Thomas," commented Judge Whitmore, a rotund man whose judicial robes could never quite hide his corrupt nature. "She'll make some lucky gentleman a fine wife." "Indeed she will," her father replied, his voice carrying a note of calculation that made Isabella's skin crawl. "In fact, I've been corresponding with Senator Morrison's eldest son. He's expressed quite an interest in making Isabella's acquaintance." The music faltered under Isabella's fingers. Marcus Morrison. She had heard the stories about him from the other young ladies in town. He was cruel and titled, and had a reputation for treating his servants little better than slaves. The thought of being tied to such a man for the rest of her life made her stomach lurch. "Father," she said, turning on the piano bench to face him, "perhaps we could discuss this privately." "Nonsense," he interrupted with a dismissive wave. "These are all family friends here. They're delighted to hear of your prospects." The men raised their glasses in a toast to her future, their faces shining with satisfaction. But all Isabella could see was a cage door slamming shut, trapping her in a life she had never chosen and would never want. As the evening wore on and the men's voices grew louder and more slurred, Isabella excused herself and slipped out through the French doors onto the terrace. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks, and she breathed deeply, trying to calm the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. The Harper estate stretched out before her in the moonlight manicured gardens, giving way to wild grassland that eventually met the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Somewhere out there beyond the boundaries of her father's influence lived people who were free to make their own choices about their lives and loves. On impulse, she gathered up her emerald silk skirts and descended the terrace steps. The garden paths were familiar to her. Even in darkness, she had walked them countless times as a child dreaming of adventure and escape. Tonight, those childhood fantasies felt more urgent than ever. She made her way to the old willow tree that marked the eastern boundary of the estate. It was her favorite spot, a place where she could sit and read without being observed or interrupted. The ancient tree's trailing branches created a natural shelter, and the nearby creek provided a soothing backdrop of moving water. As she approached the willow, Isabella heard the soft sound of someone moving in the darkness ahead. She froze, her heart beginning to race. It was well past midnight. No one from the household should be out here at this hour. "Who's there?" she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The movement stopped abruptly. For a long moment there was only silence, broken by the gentle murmur of the creek. Then slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows beneath the willow. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The man who stepped into the moonlight was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He was tall and lean, with bronzed skin and long black hair that fell past his shoulders. He wore buckskin clothing that moved with him like a second skin, and his dark eyes held a wariness that spoke of a life lived on the edge of danger. She knew immediately that he was Apache. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to call for help, to do anything but stand there staring at this man who was supposed to be her enemy. But her feet remained rooted to the ground, and her voice seemed to have deserted her entirely. The man, for she could see now that he was young, perhaps only a few years older than herself, raised his hands slowly, palms forward in a gesture of peace. "I mean, you no harm," he said in English, his voice deep and melodious, with only the faintest trace of an accent. "I was just leaving." "Wait," Isabella heard herself say, though she couldn't quite believe the word had come from her own lips. "Please don't go." He studied her face in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "You are not afraid?" The honest answer was that she was terrified, but not of him. She was afraid of going back to that house full of hatred and violence, afraid of being married off to Marcus Morrison, afraid of spending the rest of her life as a pretty ornament in someone else's parlor. "No," she said, and was surprised to find that it was true. "I'm not afraid." He took a step closer, and she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the strength in his lean frame. There was something about him that called to a part of her soul she had never known. Existed a wild, free part that had been locked away behind layers of propriety and expectation. "I am Kaelan," he said simply. "I came to the creek to water my horse." "Isabella," she replied, then caught herself. "I mean, Miss Harper?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Isabella," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It is beautiful like the woman who bears it." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she didn't look away. No man had ever spoken to her with such simple, honest appreciation. The young men of Silver Creek offered elaborate compliments that felt rehearsed and hollow. But there was something in Kaelan's voice that made her believe he truly saw her. "What are you doing so far from your people?" she asked, genuinely curious. His expression grew serious. "I could ask you the same question. A woman of your station should not be wandering alone in the darkness." "I needed air," she said. "The house was suffocating tonight." "The white men spoke of war again," he said, though it wasn't really a question. Isabella nodded, ashamed. "I'm sorry." Not all of us think as they do. But you say nothing to stop them. The words stung because they were true. What could I say? I'm just a woman. No one would listen to me. In my tribe, women are honored for their wisdom. They sit in council and their voices carry weight in important decisions. The idea was so foreign to Isabella's experience that she could barely comprehend it. That sounds wonderful, she said wistfully. Your people have strange ways, Kaelan observed. You build cages for your women and call it protection. And what of Apache women? Are they truly free? Free to speak their minds, free to choose their own husbands, free to ride and hunt if they wish, but not free from sorrow when their sons and husbands do not return from raids against your people. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Isabella felt a stab of guilt. Have you lost someone? My younger brother 2 summers ago. He was barely 16. I'm so sorry, she whispered, meaning it, with every fiber of her being. Kaelan studied her face, seeming to measure her sincerity. You speak truth, he said finally. There is no hatred in your heart, only sadness. The hatred serves no one, Isabella said. It only breeds more hatred. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of generations of conflict hanging between them like a palpable thing. But there was something else there too, a connection that neither of them could deny or explain. I should go, Kaelan said, though he made no move to leave. If I am discovered here, they would kill you. Isabella finished the reality of their situation crashing down on her like a cold wave. And you would be in great danger as well. Despite the truth of his words, neither of them moved. The space between them seemed to crackle with an electricity that Isabella had never felt before. Every rational thought in her head told her to bid him good night and return to the safety of the house. But her heart was singing a different song entirely. Tell me about your people, she said instead. What are they really like? Kaelan's eyes lit up with surprise, and something else, hope perhaps. You truly wish to know? Yes, she said, settling herself on a fallen log near the creek. Tell me everything. And so he did. As the night wore on, Kaelan painted pictures with his words of a people who lived in harmony with the land, who valued courage and wisdom above material wealth, who honored their elders and cherished their children. He spoke of summer ceremonies and winter stories, of hunting parties and harvest festivals, of a way of life that was both ancient and timeless. In return, Isabella found herself sharing her own dreams and frustrations, her longing for a life beyond the suffocating expectations of Silver Creek society. She told him about her love of reading and music, her secret desire to see the world beyond the mountains, her fear of being trapped in a marriage that would kill her spirit. You were not born to be caged, Kaelan said when she finished. Your soul is meant to soar. Sometimes I feel like I'm dying inside. She admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Every day that passes, I feel a little more of myself disappearing. Then you must find a way to live, he said with quiet intensity. You must fight for your freedom, even if the battle seems impossible. How can I fight when I have no power? You have more power than you know. The power to choose, even when the choices are hard. The power to speak truth, even when others do not wish to hear it. The power to love, even when love is forbidden. The last words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Isabella's heart began to race as she realized that somewhere in the course of their conversation, the impossible had happened. She was falling in love with this man, this Apache warrior, who was supposed to be her enemy. Kaelan, she whispered his name, feeling like a prayer on her lips. He moved closer until she could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. Isabella, he said softly, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, but your beauty comes from within. your kindness, your compassion, your courage to question what you have been taught. These things make you extraordinary." "I'm not brave," she protested. "I've never been brave." "You are here with me now," he pointed out. "You could have run, could have called for help, but instead you chose to stay and listen. That is courage." His hand reached up to touch her cheek, and she leaned into the contact like a flower turning toward the sun. The sensation sent electricity racing through her entire body. "We shouldn't," she breathed even as every cell in her body yearned for his touch. "No," he agreed, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "We shouldn't." But neither of them pulled away. Instead, they moved closer, drawn together by a force stronger than reason or fear. When Kaelan's lips finally met hers, Isabella felt as if the world had suddenly burst into flame around them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative and sweet. But as Isabella's arms wound around his neck and she pressed closer to him, it deepened into something fierce and desperate. All the loneliness and frustration of her 19 years in Monde seemed to pour out of her and into this moment, this perfect, impossible moment, when nothing existed except the two of them and the love that blazed between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Isabella could see her own wonder and terror reflected in Kaelan's eyes. "What have we done?" she whispered. "Something beautiful," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "Something dangerous." "This can never work," she said, though her heart rebelled against the words. "My people would never accept you and your people." "Would consider me a traitor for caring for a white woman," he finished. "I know." "Then what are we doing?" Kaelan cupped her face in his hands, his eyes burning with intensity. "We are choosing to love, even when love seems impossible. We are choosing to be brave, even when bravery might destroy us. And if it does destroy us, then at least we will have lived truly, if only for a moment." Isabella knew he was right. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, truly herself. The proper young lady who attended tea parties and embroidered pillowcases was a stranger to her now. This woman who could kiss an Apache warrior under the stars, this was who she really was. "When will I see you again?" she asked, hating the note of desperation in her voice. "Tomorrow night," he said without hesitation, "if you wish it." "I wish it," she said, the words coming from the deepest part of her soul. They kissed again, sealing the promise between them. Then, reluctantly, Kaelan stepped back. "Go now," he said, "before you are missed." Isabella nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to stay. She began to walk back toward the house, then turned for one last look. Kaelan was already melting back into the shadows, as silent as smoke. "Kaelan," she called softly. "Yes." "Thank you," she said, "for showing me who I really am." "You showed yourself, Isabella. I only helped you see it." As she made her way back to the house, Isabella felt as if she were walking in a dream. The same walls that had seemed like a prison just hours earlier now felt like a temporary inconvenience. She had something to live for now, something worth fighting for. But as she slipped through the French doors and back into the suffocating atmosphere of her father's world, reality began to creep back in. The men were still drinking and talking, their voices even more violent than before. "The solution is simple," Colonel Brennan was saying, his scarred face twisted with hatred. "We drive them out completely, every last one of them." "And if they resist?" asked Judge Whitmore. "Then we eliminate the resistance," Brennan replied coldly. "There's no room in this territory for both civilized people and savages." Isabella felt sick. These men were talking about genocide as casually as they might discuss the weather. And somewhere out there in the darkness was Kaelan, the gentle, intelligent man who had shown her what real love could feel like. "Ah, Isabella," her father said, noticing her return. "I was just telling the gentleman about your engagement to young Morrison. He'll be arriving next week to formally ask for your hand." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Father, I haven't agreed to any engagement." "Nonsense," Thomas Harper said with a dismissive laugh. "It's all arranged. The boy comes from excellent stock, and the union will be quite advantageous for both families." "I won't marry him," Isabella said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it before. The room fell silent. Every man turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. "Isabella," her father said in a warning tone, "you're overwrought. Perhaps you should retire for the evening." "I'm not overwrought," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I simply refuse to marry a man I don't love." "Love?" Colonel Brennan spat. "What does love have to do with marriage? Marriage is a business arrangement, girl. Your duty is to obey your father and make an advantageous match." "Perhaps my duty is to think for myself," Isabella shot back. The colonel's face turned purple with rage. "This is what comes of educating women," he snarled. "Give them books, and they get ideas above their station." "That's enough," Thomas Harper said sharply. But Isabella could see the anger building in his eyes. "Isabella, you will apologize to our guests immediately, and then you will go to your room to consider your behavior." "I won't apologize for speaking the truth," she said. "And I won't marry Marcus Morrison or anyone else you choose for me." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the room, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Behind her, she could hear the explosion of angry voices, but she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she had stood up for herself. In her bedroom, Isabella stood before her mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Her eyes were bright with passion and purpose, her cheeks flushed with the memory of Kaelan's kisses. She looked alive in a way she never had before. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see her maid. Instead, her father entered, his face dark with fury. "What has gotten into you tonight?" he demanded. "You embarrassed me in front of some of the most important men in the territory." "I spoke my mind," Isabella said simply. "Isn't that what you raised me to do?" "I raised you to be a lady?" he snapped. "Ladies do not contradict their fathers in public. Ladies do not refuse advantageous marriages. Ladies do not behave like common rebels." "Then perhaps I'm not a lady," Isabella said, the words feeling like freedom on her tongue. Thomas Harper's face went white with shock. "You are my daughter," he said slowly, "and you will behave accordingly. The Morrison boy will arrive next week. You will receive him graciously, and you will accept his proposal when he makes it." "And if I refuse?" "Then you will find yourself with no home, no family, and no resources," he said coldly. "Is that what you want?" The threat hung in the air between them like a blade. Isabella knew her father well enough to know he meant every word. But as she thought of Kaelan's words about choosing to be brave, even when bravery might destroy her, she found her courage. "If that's the price of my freedom," she said quietly, "then yes." Her father stared at her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. Then his expression hardened. "We'll discuss this further when you've come to your senses," he said. "Until then, you're confined to this house. I'll have Mrs. Patterson keep watch to ensure you don't go wandering off again." After he left, Isabella sank onto her bed, the weight of what she had done settling over her. She had just defied the most powerful man in her world, and there would be consequences. But as she thought of tomorrow night and her promise to meet Kaelan again, she found she didn't care about the consequences. For the first time in her life, she was truly living. The next evening brought a thunderstorm that matched Isabella's turbulent emotions. Rain lashed against her bedroom windows as she paced like a caged animal watching Mrs. Patterson doze in the chair by the door. The elderly housekeeper had been stationed there all day, following Thomas Harper's orders to keep his rebellious daughter under constant surveillance. But Isabella had not survived 19 years in her father's house without learning a few tricks. The old maple tree outside her window had been her escape route many times as a child, and though the storm made it more dangerous, she was determined to keep her promise to meet Kaelan. As Mrs. Patterson's snores grew deeper, Isabella carefully opened her window and climbed out onto the rain-slicked branch. Her green dress was soaked within seconds, but she didn't care. Nothing could keep her from this meeting, not her father's threats, not the storm, not the growing certainty that she was walking toward either the greatest happiness or the greatest tragedy of her life. The willow tree provided some shelter from the rain, but not much. Isabella huddled beneath its trailing branches, shivering and wondering if Kaelan would come in such weather. Then she heard the soft sound of approaching footsteps, and her heart leaped. He emerged from the storm like a figure from a dream. His long hair darkened with rain, his buckskin clothes clinging to his lean frame. The moment he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her forget all about the cold and wet. "You came," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Nothing could have stopped me," she replied, melting into his warmth. They found shelter in a small cave that Kaelan knew about, hidden among the rocks near the creek. As they waited for the storm to pass, Isabella told him about her confrontation with her father and the threat of the arranged marriage. "He means it," she said, her voice barely audible above the rain. "If I don't marry Morrison, he'll disown me completely." Kaelan's jaw tightened. "And if you do marry him, then I'll spend the rest of my life dying by inches," she whispered. "Marcus Morrison is a cruel man, Kaelan. The servants at his ranch live in terror of him." "Then you cannot marry him," Kaelan said fiercely. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for their greed." "What choice do I have? I have no money of my own, no skills to support myself. If my father casts me out—" "You could come with me," Kaelan said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they did her. Isabella stared at him, her heart racing. "What did you say? Come with me?" He repeated, his voice growing stronger. "Leave this place behind and come with me to my people." "They would never accept me," she protested. "I'm white, I'm the enemy." "Some would oppose it," he admitted. "But others would see what I see, a woman of courage and compassion who has been trapped by the hatred of her own people. And if they refuse to accept me, then we'll make our own way," he said, taking her hands in his. "There are places beyond both our peoples where we could live free." The possibility hung between them, like a bright star in the darkness. To leave everything behind, to abandon the only life she had ever known. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Kaelan," she whispered, "are you asking me to run away with you?" "I'm asking you to choose freedom," he said. "I'm asking you to choose love over fear, hope over despair. I'm asking you to choose me." Isabella looked into his eyes and saw her future there, uncertain, dangerous, but with possibility. The safe path led to a slow death in Morrison's house. The dangerous path led toward something real and beautiful, even if it ultimately destroyed them both. "Yes," she whispered the word, carrying the weight of her entire world. "Yes, I'll come with you." Kaelan's face transformed with joy, and he kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. In that moment, Isabella felt as if she could conquer armies, as if love had made her invincible. But even as they made their plans for escape, the seeds of their downfall were already being sown. Mrs. Patterson had awakened to find Isabella's bed empty and her window open. The alarm had been raised, and even now Sheriff Briggs was organizing search parties. And in the Apache camp 15 miles away, Kaelan's cousin Etu was growing suspicious of his frequent absences. The young war chief had his own plans for dealing with the white settlers' plans that didn't include mercy or compromise. The storm was gathering on all sides, and soon Isabella and Kaelan would find themselves at the center of a conflict that would test their love and their courage in ways they could never imagine. But for now, in the shelter of the cave, with the rain washing the world clean outside, there was only love and the promise of tomorrow. They held each other close and spoke of the life they would build together, unaware that their next meeting would be their last moment of peace, before the storm broke over them with all the fury of two worlds at war. As dawn approached and they prepared to part, Kaelan caught Isabella's hand. "Whatever happens," he said, his eyes intense in the growing light, "know that you have given me something I never thought I would find. You have given me hope. And you have given me life," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. They kissed one final time before returning to their separate worlds, neither knowing that by tomorrow night half the territory would be hunting them both. The first drops of blood hadn't been spilled yet, but Isabella could taste the metallic tang of violence in the air as she slipped back through her bedroom window, just as the eastern sky began to blush with dawn. Her dress clung to her skin, heavy with rainwater and the weight of the decision she had made. In 12 hours, when darkness fell again, she would leave everything behind and flee into the wilderness with the man who had stolen her heart. Mrs. Patterson still dozed in her chair, unaware that her charge had spent the night planning an escape that would shake Silver Creek to its very foundations. Isabella changed quickly into a dry nightgown and slipped beneath her covers, but sleep was impossible. Every nerve in her body hummed with anticipation and terror in equal measure. She had just begun to drift off when her bedroom door burst open with such violence that the heavy oak panel crashed against the wall. Isabella jolted upright to find her father standing in the doorway, his face twisted with a rage she had never seen before. Behind him lurked Sheriff Briggs, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt revolver. "Where were you last night?" Thomas Harper's voice was deadly quiet, more frightening than any shout. Mrs. Patterson scrambled to her feet, her face pale with confusion and fear. "Sir, she was here all night. I watched her myself." "Then explain this," Harper said, holding up Isabella's muddy shoes that she had foolishly left by the window. "Explain why my daughter's boots are caked with creek mud when she supposedly never left this room." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "I couldn't sleep. I went to the garden for some air." "In the middle of a thunderstorm?" Sheriff Briggs stepped forward, his pale eyes boring into hers. "That's mighty strange behavior for a young lady." "I find many things about my daughter's recent behavior strange." Harper said, his gaze never leaving Isabella's face. Her sudden defiance, her refusal to accept a perfectly good marriage proposal, and now these midnight wanderings. "Father, I told you." "You told me lies." He cut her off sharply. "Mrs. Patterson, you're dismissed. And if I discover you've been negligent in your duties, you'll be looking for new employment." The elderly woman hurried from the room, leaving Isabella alone with the two men whose hatred she could feel radiating like heat from a forge. Briggs moved to stand between her and the door, effectively trapping her. "There have been Apache signs near the creek," the sheriff said conversationally, though his eyes remained cold as winter stone. "Fresh tracks, recent campfires. Makes a man wonder what a young lady might encounter on a midnight stroll." Isabella fought to keep her expression neutral, but she could feel her cheeks burning with telltale color. "I wouldn't know anything about that." "Wouldn't you?" Briggs took another step closer. See, I've been sheriff in this territory for 15 years, Miss Harper. I've learned to read sign, both the kind left in dirt and the kind left on faces. And right now your face is telling me a mighty interesting story. You're imagining things, Isabella said, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Thomas Harper moved to his daughter's vanity table and began examining her belongings with methodical precision. He opened her jewelry box, rifled through her letters, checked the drawers. When he lifted her pillow and found nothing, his frown deepened. "Strip the bed," he ordered Briggs. "Father, this is outrageous. What's outrageous is having a daughter who sneaks out to meet with savages." Harper snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think your shameful behavior would go unnoticed forever?" Isabella's blood turned to ice. They knew. Somehow they knew about Kaelan. "I don't know what you're talking about." Briggs was methodically tearing apart her bedding, searching for evidence of her betrayal. When he found nothing there, he moved to her wardrobe and began pulling out her dresses, checking pockets and seams with practiced efficiency. "Here we go," he said suddenly, his voice thick with satisfaction. He held up a small piece of beaded leather that had caught on the fabric of her green dress, a fragment of Kaelan's clothing that had torn away during their passionate embrace in the cave. Isabella's heart stopped. The tiny piece of buckskin might as well have been a signed confession. "Apache beadwork," Briggs confirmed, holding the evidence up to the light. "Fresh too, no weathering or fading." Harper's face went through a series of transformations, shock, disbelief, and finally a cold fury that made Isabella shrink back against her headboard. "My daughter," he said slowly, as if testing the words, "has been consorting with Apache warriors." "It's not what you think," Isabella began desperately. "What I think," Harper said, his voice deadly calm again, "is that my daughter has disgraced herself and endangered this entire community. What I think is that she's been seduced by a savage and turned against her own people." "He's not a savage." The words burst out of Isabella before she could stop them. "He's kind and gentle and more civilized than any man in this town." The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. Both men stared at her, as if she had suddenly sprouted horns and a tail. "Jesus Christ," Briggs breathed. "She's defending him." Harper's face had gone white as parchment. "How long?" he asked in a whisper. "How long what? How long have you been meeting with this animal?" Isabella lifted her chin defiantly. "His name is Kaelan, and he's worth 10 of any man in Silver Creek." The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Her father's palm cracked across her cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side and bring tears to her eyes. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish in his voice when he spoke. "You stupid, stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've found someone who loves me for who I am, not what I represent," Isabella said, tasting blood from her split lip. "Love?" Harper laughed bitterly. "You think that savage loves you? You're nothing to him but a conquest, a way to strike at the heart of our community. When he's done using you, he'll slit your throat and leave your body for the coyotes." "You're wrong," Isabella said fiercely. "You know nothing about him or what we share." "What we know," Briggs interjected, "is that Apache bucks have been using white women as weapons of war for decades. They seduce them, turn them against their own families, and use them to gather intelligence about our defenses." "That's not true, isn't it?" Harper moved closer, his eyes blazing with pain and anger. "What have you told him about our town, about our numbers, our weapons, our plans?" "Nothing. We never spoke of such things." "But you spoke," Briggs said, pouncing on her words. "You met with him multiple times. You shared information about your family, your community, your way of life." Isabella realized too late that she had been trapped by her own honesty. Every innocent conversation with Kaelan could be twisted into evidence of espionage. "He's not using me," she said desperately. "What we have is real." "What you have," Harper said coldly, "is a death sentence. For yourself, for him, and possibly for this entire town." Before Isabella could ask what he meant, the sound of galloping horses reached them from the courtyard below. Harper moved to the window and cursed under his breath. "It's starting already," he muttered. Isabella rushed to look out and saw a group of armed men dismounting in front of the house. She recognized most of them ranchers and miners from the surrounding area, all carrying rifles and wearing expressions of grim determination. "Word's spreading," Briggs observed. "News like this has a way of traveling fast." "What news?" Isabella asked, though she dreaded the answer. "That the mayor's daughter has been corrupted by Apache influence," Harper said heavily. "That our community has been infiltrated and compromised. But that's not... It doesn't matter what's true." Briggs cut her off. "What matters is what people believe. And right now, they believe that you've been helping the enemy." The sound of angry voices drifted up from the courtyard, and Isabella caught fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. "Need to send a message. Can't let this stand. Time for decisive action." Harper ran his hands through his graying hair, suddenly looking older than his 50 years. "Do you see what you've done? Your selfish infatuation has put the entire territory at risk." "How can loving someone put anyone at risk? Because love makes people stupid." He exploded. "Love makes them blind to reality, deaf to reason. You think your Apache lover cares about you? He cares about using you to destroy everything we've built here." Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to defend Kaelan and their love, but doubt was beginning to creep into her heart like poison. What if her father was right? What if she had been naive and foolish? What if Kaelan had been playing an elaborate game from the very beginning? No. She pushed the treacherous thoughts away. She had looked into Kaelan's eyes, felt the honesty in his touch, heard the sincerity in his voice. What they shared was real, regardless of what anyone else believed. "I'm going to marry Marcus Morrison," she said suddenly, the lie tasting like ashes in her mouth. "I was being foolish before, but I see now that you're right." The engagement should proceed as planned. Both men stared at her in surprise. Harper's face showed a flicker of hope. "You're agreeing to the marriage?" "Yes," Isabella said, praying that her voice sounded convincing. "I was confused, but I understand now. I'll write to Mr. Morrison immediately and apologize for my previous behavior." Briggs frowned, his instincts clearly telling him something was wrong. "That's a mighty sudden change of heart." "I've had time to think," Isabella said, "to realize how foolish I've been." Harper studied her face intently, searching for deception. "And this Apache, you'll have no further contact with him." "Of course not," Isabella lied smoothly. "I see now that he was using me just as you said. I want nothing more to do with him." The sheriff wasn't buying it. "Then you won't mind if we post guards around the house, just to make sure there are no more midnight visits?" Isabella's heart sank, but she forced a smile. "That seems very reasonable." Harper moved to the window again, watching the crowd of armed men below. "I'm afraid it's too late for half measures," he said grimly. "The damage has been done. People are scared, angry. They want action." "What kind of action?" Isabella asked, though she feared the answer. "A show of force," Briggs said. "Something to demonstrate that we won't tolerate Apache aggression in any form." "You mean a raid?" Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean justice," Harper corrected. "Your lover and his people need to understand that there are consequences for their actions." Isabella felt the walls closing in around her. In trying to save herself and Kaelan by agreeing to the marriage, she had inadvertently condemned his entire tribe. The men downstairs weren't just talking about capturing one Apache warrior. They were planning something much larger and more terrible. "Father, please," she said, dropping all pretense. "Don't do this. Innocent people will die." Innocent? Harper's laugh was bitter. "There are no innocent Apaches, Isabella. They're all complicit in this war against civilization." "That's not true. Kaelan told me about children elders, families who want nothing but peace." "Kaelan told you many things," Briggs interrupted. "Lies designed to make you sympathetic to their cause. You've been thoroughly corrupted, girl. Everything you think you know about these people has been poisoned by his influence." Isabella realized that no amount of argument would change their minds. They had already decided that she was a victim of Apache manipulation, that her feelings weren't real, that her judgment couldn't be trusted. In their eyes, she was no longer a person capable of making her own decisions. She was a possession that had been stolen and needed to be reclaimed. "I need some time alone," she said quietly, "to process everything that's happened." Harper nodded, some of his anger seeming to drain away. "That's wise. Stay in your room today and think about what you've done. Tomorrow we'll begin making arrangements for your wedding to Morrison. A quick ceremony might help restore your reputation." After the men left, locking her door behind them, Isabella collapsed onto her bed and allowed herself to cry for the first time since this nightmare had begun. But even as tears streamed down her cheeks, her mind was working frantically. She had to find a way to warn Kaelan, had to prevent the massacre that was being planned in response to their love. Through her window, she could see more men arriving throughout the day. By noon, there were nearly 50 armed riders gathered in the courtyard, their faces hard with purpose. She recognized Colonel Brennan among them, along with several other veterans of Indian fighting. These weren't farmers or shopkeepers. They were professional killers who had been waiting for an excuse to resume their war against the Apache. As the sun climbed higher, Isabella heard fragments of their planning sessions drifting up from below. They were organizing into smaller groups, dividing up the territory, preparing for a coordinated strike against every Apache camp within 50 miles. It would be a slaughter. The irony was crushing. In seeking freedom through love, she had instead triggered a genocide. Her father was right about one thing: her selfish desires had put countless innocent lives at risk, but even knowing the consequences, she couldn't bring herself to regret loving Kaelan. What they shared was the most real and beautiful thing she had ever experienced. If that love had to be paid for in blood, then at least it had been worth something. As afternoon faded into evening, Isabella made her decision. She would find a way to escape and warn Kaelan, even if it meant sacrificing her own life in the process. She owed him that much, and she owed it to the innocent people who would die because of their forbidden romance. But first, she had to get past the guards who now surrounded the house like a ring of steel. Her father had been thorough in his precautions. There were men watching every door and window, making escape seem impossible. Almost impossible. As darkness fell and the guards settled into their posts, Isabella remembered something her childhood friend, Maria Santos, had told her years ago. Maria's family had briefly worked for the Harpers before moving on to Denver, and during her time at the estate, she had discovered something that even Isabella's father didn't know about. Hidden behind a false panel in the cellar was a tunnel that had been dug during the early days of Silver Creek, when Apache raids were more frequent and homesteaders needed secret escape routes. The tunnel emerged nearly a quarter-mile away, well beyond the perimeter that the guards were watching. Isabella had never seen the tunnel herself, but Maria had described its location in detail during one of their secret games. If the passage still existed, if it hadn't collapsed or been sealed up, it might be her only chance. She waited until well past midnight, when the house had settled into silence and the guards had grown complacent. Then she crept from her room and made her way carefully down the servants' stairs to the cellar. Every step seemed to echo like thunder in her ears. but somehow she managed to reach the basement without raising an alarm. The cellar was black as pitch, forcing her to feel her way along the stone walls with trembling fingers. According to Maria's description, the hidden panel was located behind the wine racks, disguised as part of the foundation. It took her nearly an hour of careful searching before her fingers found the subtle seam in the stonework. The panel was small, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. But when she pressed against it, the ancient mechanism still worked. The stone swung inward with a soft grinding sound, revealing a tunnel that disappeared into absolute darkness. Isabella hesitated for only a moment before squeezing through the opening. The passage was narrow and low, forcing her to crawl on her hands and knees through air that smelled of earth and decay. Spiders' webs caught in her hair, and more than once she had to stop and fight down waves of claustrophobia that threatened to overwhelm her. But thoughts of Kaelan drove her forward through the suffocating darkness. He would be waiting at their meeting place, unaware that death was riding toward his people. She had to reach him in time to prevent the massacre, even if it meant her own destruction. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever. But finally, she saw a faint glow ahead that might have been starlight. The exit was hidden among a cluster of boulders near the creek, concealed so well that she might have walked past it a dozen times without noticing. Isabella emerged from the tunnel like a creature being born from the earth itself, gasping in the sweet night air and brushing dirt from her torn dress. She was free, but she had no time to celebrate. Even now, Colonel Brennan's men might be riding toward the Apache camps with murder in their hearts. The willow tree where she had first met Kaelan seemed different now, transformed from a place of romance into something that felt haunted by the violence her love had unleashed. But Kaelan was there, waiting for her, just as he had promised, his face lighting up with joy when he saw her approaching. "Isabella," he said, moving toward her with arms outstretched. "I was beginning to fear you wouldn't come." "Kaelan, listen to me," she said urgently, catching his hands before he could embrace her. "They know. My father knows about us, and they're planning something terrible." The joy faded from his face, replaced by grim understanding. "How much do they know?" "Everything. They found a piece of your clothing in my room, and I couldn't lie convincingly enough. They know we've been meeting." Kaelan nodded grimly. "I feared this might happen. My cousin Etu has been asking questions about my absences. He suspects I am meeting with someone from your people." "It's worse than that," Isabella said desperately. "They're not just angry about us, they're using our relationship as an excuse for war. There are 50 armed men gathered at my father's house planning raids against every Apache camp in the territory." The color drained from Kaelan's face. "When? Tonight. Tomorrow morning at the latest. Kaelan, you have to warn your people. You have to get them to safety." "There is no safety," he said quietly. "If what you say is true, then this is the war my people have been dreading. The war that will end with our destruction or exile." "Then run," Isabella pleaded. "Take your family and run as far as you can. And leave the others to die. Leave the children and elders to face the soldiers' guns." Kaelan shook his head. "I cannot do that." Isabella felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so selfish, if I had stayed away from you, then neither of us would have known what love could be," Kaelan said, cupping her face in his hands. "Do not regret what we shared, Isabella. It was worth any price. Even the price of your people's blood." "My people have been dying for years," he said sadly. "The white man's hunger for land and gold makes war inevitable. You and I, we simply gave them an excuse to begin the slaughter a little sooner." Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to deny the truth of his words, but she knew he was right. The hatred between their peoples ran too deep for love to bridge. Their romance hadn't created the conflict, it had simply provided the spark that would ignite a war that had been building for decades. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "Now we choose." Kaelan said, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "We can run away together and live with the knowledge that our love helped destroy my people. Or we can try to prevent this war, even if it costs us everything." "How can we prevent it? No one will listen to us." "Perhaps not," he agreed. "But we have to try. If there is even a small chance that we can stop this madness, don't we owe it to the innocent to take that chance?" Isabella looked into his eyes and saw her answer there. Despite everything that had happened, despite the hatred and fear that surrounded them, Kaelan still believed in the possibility of peace. His faith in humanity remained unshaken, even when humanity had given him every reason to despair. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Return to your father," he said. "Tell him you escaped to warn me, to give me a chance to surrender myself. Offer to be the bridge between our peoples. He'll never agree to that. He thinks you've bewitched me. Then we make him an offer he cannot refuse." Kaelan said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Tell him that if he calls off the raids, I will surrender myself for trial. One life in exchange for avoiding a war that will cost hundreds." Isabella stared at him in horror. "You're talking about sacrificing yourself." "I am talking about responsibility," he corrected. "Our love has consequences, Isabella. If my death can prevent the slaughter of my people, then it is a price worth paying." "No," she said fiercely. "I won't let you die for loving me. And I won't let my people die for my selfishness," he replied with equal intensity. "This is the only way." They stood there in the shadow of the willow tree, two young people caught between worlds that demanded they choose sides in a war neither of them wanted. The weight of their love had become a burden too heavy for their hearts to bear alone. "There has to be another way," Isabella said desperately. "If there is, I cannot see it," Kaelan admitted. "But perhaps we can create a different ending to this story." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark waters of the creek. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of desperate hope. "What if we refuse to let them use our love as a weapon? What if instead of hiding or surrendering, we stand together and demand that they see us as we truly are?" Isabella felt a spark of understanding. "You mean face them together? I mean force them to confront the reality of what they're planning to destroy." Kaelan said, his eyes beginning to burn with purpose. "Let them see that love can exist between our peoples. Let them choose between hatred and hope." It was a desperate plan, almost certainly doomed to failure. But as Isabella looked at the man who had taught her what courage really meant, she found herself nodding. "When?" she asked. "Now," he said, "before dawn breaks and the killing begins." Together they turned their backs on the safety of the darkness and walked toward a confrontation that would determine not just their own fates, but the future of two peoples balanced on the knife's edge of war. The sound of their footsteps seemed to echo across the entire territory as Isabella and Kaelan made their way toward the Harper estate, each step carrying them closer to a confrontation that would either save two peoples or destroy them both. The pre-dawn air was thick with tension, as if the very earth could sense the violence that hung suspended like a blade over Silver Creek. As they crested the hill that overlooked the estate, Isabella gasped at the sight that greeted them. The courtyard blazed with torchlight, revealing nearly 100 armed men now gathered in loose formations. Horses stamped and snorted in the crisp air, their breath creating clouds of vapor that looked like smoke in the flickering light. The men moved with the purposeful efficiency of soldiers preparing for battle, checking weapons and adjusting saddles with grim determination. "Dear God," Isabella whispered, her hand finding Kaelan's. There are so many of them. Kaelan's jaw tightened as he studied the scene below. More than I expected. They mean to finish this once and for all. At the center of the chaos stood Colonel Brennan, his scarred face animated as he gestured toward a crude map spread across a makeshift table. Even from their distant position, Isabella could see the red marks that indicated Apache camps scattered across the territory. Each mark represented families, children, elders, who would be dead before the sun reached its zenith. It's not too late, she said desperately. We could still run. Find another way. Look at their faces, Kaelan said quietly. This is not about justice or protection anymore. This is about blood. They will not stop until every Apache in the territory is dead or driven out. Isabella studied the men below and saw the truth in Kaelan's words. These weren't reluctant soldiers acting out of duty. They were eager hunters who had finally been given permission to kill. The restraint that had held them back for months had snapped like an overstretched rope, and now nothing but complete victory would satisfy their bloodlust. Then we have to try, she said, squeezing his hand. Even if it's hopeless. Especially because it's hopeless, Kaelan agreed. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you know you cannot win. They began their descent toward the estate, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid being mistaken for raiders in the uncertain light. As they drew closer, Isabella could hear fragments of conversation that made her stomach churn with dread. Hit the winter camp first. That's where they keep the women and children. No prisoners this time. We tried that before, and look where it got us. Make sure none escape to warn the others. The casual discussion of mass murder filled Isabella with a rage she had never known she possessed. These men were planning to slaughter innocents while convinced of their own righteousness, and the injustice of it burned in her chest like acid. As they reached the edge of the torchlight, a sentry spotted them and raised his rifle with practiced speed. Halt! Who goes there? The sharp command cut through the ambient noise like a knife, and suddenly every eye in the courtyard was turned toward them. The effect was electric. Conversations died mid-sentence, hands moved to weapons, and the entire gathering transformed from a planning session into a potential battlefield in the space of a heartbeat. Sheriff Briggs pushed through the crowd, his hand already drawing his revolver. When he saw Isabella walking hand in hand with a tall Apache warrior, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and vindication. "Well, I'll be damned," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like the mayor's daughter has brought us a present." Thomas Harper emerged from the house at the sound of the commotion, still buttoning his coat. When he saw his daughter standing defiantly beside her Apache lover, the color drained from his face as if he had seen a ghost. "Isabella?" He breathed, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. "What have you done?" "I've come to prevent a massacre," she called back, her voice stronger and clearer than she had ever heard it. "We need to talk." Colonel Brennan stepped forward, his scarred hand resting on his saber hilt. "The only talking that needs to be done is with the business end of a rope," he growled. "That buck's got some brass, I'll give him that. Walking right into our hands." "He came under my protection," Isabella said firmly. "He's here to prevent bloodshed, not cause it." A harsh laugh rippled through the crowd of armed men. Someone called out, "Looks like the savage's got more than just brass. He's got the mayor's daughter dancing to his tune." The crude comment sent a wave of angry muttering through the crowd. But Kaelan remained perfectly still, his dark eyes scanning the hostile faces that surrounded them. Isabella could feel the tension radiating from his body, but his expression showed no fear, only a sad resignation that broke her heart. "Stand down, all of you," Harper commanded, his voice cutting through the rising noise. This is still my property, and I'll handle this situation. He began walking toward them, his stride steady despite the obvious turmoil in his emotions. As he drew closer, Isabella could see the pain and disappointment etched into every line of his face. "You escaped from a locked room to bring him here," he said, when he was close enough to speak without shouting. "Why?" "Because I love him," Isabella said simply. "And because innocent people are about to die for no reason other than that love." "Innocent." Harper's voice rose dangerously. "This savage has corrupted my daughter, used her for his own purposes, and now you stand there defending him." "He has done nothing but love me in return," Isabella replied. "If that makes him guilty of something, then we're both criminals." Sheriff Briggs had been edging closer during their exchange, his revolver still drawn. "Thomas, this has gone on long enough. Let me put a bullet in this buck and be done with it." "No." Isabella stepped protectively in front of Kaelan, her arms spread wide. "If you want to kill him, you'll have to kill me first." The declaration sent a shocked murmur through the crowd. Several men lowered their weapons, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of shooting the mayor's daughter, even if she had supposedly been corrupted by Apache influence. "Isabella, get away from him," Harper pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Can't you see what he's done to you? This isn't love, it's manipulation. He's turned you against your own family, your own people." "He's opened my eyes," she said fiercely. "He's shown me that the hatred between our peoples doesn't have to continue. That there can be understanding, compassion, even love." "Pretty words." Colonel Brennan interrupted his patience, clearly exhausted. "But love doesn't stop bullets, and it sure as hell doesn't undo what his people have done to ours." Kaelan spoke for the first time since their arrival, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "What have my people done that your people have not done as well?" The simple question seemed to hit the gathered men like a physical blow. For a moment, nobody spoke, as if the obvious truth of his words had rendered them speechless. "You've killed innocent settlers," Brennan said finally, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "As you have killed innocent Apache," Kaelan replied calmly. "You've taken our land, destroyed our sacred places, slaughtered our buffalo. When we fight back, you call us savages. When you attack us, you call it civilization." "It's not the same thing," Dr. Aldrich protested from somewhere in the crowd. "We're bringing order to a wilderness building, something permanent and good." "For yourselves," Kaelan said. "Not for us. You build your order on our graves and call it progress." Isabella felt a surge of pride at the quiet dignity with which Kaelan faced his accusers. He wasn't pleading or groveling, he was simply speaking truth to power, knowing full well that truth might be the last thing he ever spoke. "Enough philosophy," Briggs snarled. "This buck's got blood on his hands, same as the rest of them. Time to pay the price." "Wait," Isabella said desperately. "There's something you need to know, something that might change everything." Harper frowned. "What are you talking about?" Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would either save them or doom them both. Kaelan isn't just any Apache warrior. He's the nephew of Chief Manuelito, one of the most influential leaders in the territory. If you kill him, you won't just be starting a war, you'll be guaranteeing that it never ends. The revelation sent a shockwave through the crowd. Even Brennan looked taken aback, his scarred face creasing with new concern. "Is this true?" Harper demanded, turning to Kaelan. "It is," Kaelan confirmed quietly. "My uncle leads the largest band of free Apache remaining in this territory. He has been advocating for peace. But if I am murdered while under a flag of truce..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present understood the implications. The death of a chief's nephew would turn even the most peaceful Apache into implacable enemies. All the more reason to kill him quickly and quietly, someone called out from the back of the crowd. Make it look like an accident. And when his body is found with bullet holes, Isabella shot back. Do you think his people are fools? They'll know exactly what happened, and they'll have proof that white men can't be trusted even when someone comes to them in peace. She could see the wheels turning in her father's mind as he processed this new information. Thomas Harper was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He understood that killing Kaelan now would transform him from a problem into a martyr, someone whose death would unite the Apache tribes against Silver Creek more effectively than any war chief's rhetoric. What do you want? Harper asked finally, the question directed at both of them. A chance to prevent this war, Isabella said. A chance to show that our peoples can coexist without slaughtering each other. How? Brennan demanded. Your daughter's been bewitched by this savage. How does that prove anything except that they can't be trusted? It proves that love can exist between us. Kaelan said, his arm coming around Isabella's shoulders. If a white woman and an Apache warrior can find understanding and affection, then perhaps our peoples can as well. One couple doesn't prove anything, Dr. Aldrich protested. And even if it did, how does that solve our immediate problems? There are still raiders attacking our settlements, still threats to our families. The raids will stop, Kaelan said with quiet confidence. My uncle has been working to end them for months. The young warriors who still fight do so without the blessing of the tribal council. Pretty convenient, Briggs said skeptically. Easy enough to claim that when you're staring down the barrel of a gun. It's the truth, Kaelan insisted. Chief Manuelito knows that continued warfare will only bring more soldiers, more violence. He seeks a path to peace. Then why haven't we heard from him directly? Harper asked. Why send messages through my daughter's relationship with you? Because he didn't send me, Kaelan admitted. I came here on my own, drawn by curiosity about your people. When I met Isabella, everything changed. The honesty of his admission seemed to catch everyone off guard. They had expected denials, justifications, or elaborate excuses. Instead, they got simple truth delivered without apology or embellishment. So, you're saying this whole thing started by accident? Harper said slowly. Love often does, Isabella said softly. It doesn't ask permission or wait for convenient timing. It simply happens. And now that it has happened, Kaelan added, we can choose to let it become something good or something destructive. The choice is yours. The choice is mine. Harper's voice rose again. You seduce my daughter, turn her against her own people, and then tell me the choice is mine. The choice of how to respond, Kaelan clarified. You can let anger and hatred drive you to murder an unarmed man who came here seeking peace. Or you can use this opportunity to build something better. What kind of opportunity? Colonel Brennan asked, his hand still resting on his weapon, but his voice slightly less hostile. A meeting, Isabella said, the idea forming even as she spoke, between Chief Manuelito and the leaders of Silver Creek. A chance to negotiate a real peace, not just a temporary truce. And you think your uncle would agree to such a meeting? Harper asked Kaelan. If I ask him to, yes. He trusts my judgment even when he disagrees with my choices. And if this is all an elaborate trap, Briggs demanded. If we agree to this meeting and find ourselves surrounded by 100 Apache warriors, then you'll know that Isabella and I died for nothing, Kaelan said simply. Because we'll be there too, betting our lives on the possibility of peace. The crowd stirred uneasily at this proposal. Many of the men had come expecting a simple raid against defenseless camps, not a complex negotiation that might require them to see their enemies as human beings. I don't like it, Brennan said bluntly. Too many things could go wrong. too many chances for betrayal. There are already too many chances for betrayal, Isabella pointed out. The question is whether we choose to trust or to kill, whether we choose hope or hatred. Hope doesn't stop arrows, someone called out. Neither does hatred, Kaelan replied. Hatred only creates more arrows, more bullets, more graves. Thomas Harper looked around at the faces of his supporters, reading the uncertainty and conflict in their expressions. These men had come prepared for war, but now they were being asked to consider peace. The psychological shift was difficult for many of them to process. Even if I agreed to such a meeting, Harper said slowly, how do I know your people would honor any agreement we reached? How do I know this isn't just a way to buy time for them to prepare for war? You don't, Kaelan admitted. Just as I don't know that your people wouldn't use such a meeting to plan a more effective attack. Trust always involves risk. But the alternative is certain death, Isabella added. If you proceed with these raids, innocent people will die on both sides. Women, children, elders who have never harmed anyone. Is your hatred worth that much blood? Harper's face was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Isabella could see the love he bore for her, warring with his anger and disappointment, his desire to protect his community, fighting against his recognition that she might be right about the futility of violence. Father, she said softly, using the word like a bridge across the chasm that had opened between them. I know you think I've been fooled or corrupted. But look at me. Really look at me. Have you ever seen me happier? Have you ever seen me more alive? Harper's eyes met hers, and for a moment the angry politician disappeared, leaving only a father who was trying to understand what had happened to his little girl. You're not the same person, he said quietly. The daughter I raised would never have defied me like this. The daughter you raised was never allowed to make her own choices, Isabella replied gently. You kept me so safe, so protected, that I never learned who I really was. Kaelan helped me find myself. And what you found was someone willing to betray her own people. What I found was someone willing to believe that people don't have to be enemies just because they're different. Before Harper could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Enough of this foolishness! The crowd parted to reveal Marcus Morrison striding into the courtyard, his expensive clothes and arrogant bearing marking him as clearly as a uniform. Isabella's stomach lurched at the sight of her intended husband. His pale eyes fixed on her with a possessive intensity that made her skin crawl. Marcus, Harper said, clearly surprised. I didn't expect you until next week. I came as soon as I received word that my fiancé had been compromised by Apache influence, Morrison said coldly. I can see the reports were accurate. He looked Isabella up and down as if she were damaged livestock, his gaze lingering on her torn dress and disheveled appearance with obvious disgust. Look at her, he said to the crowd. This is what becomes of white women who consort with savages. They become savages themselves. How dare you, Isabella began, but Morrison cut her off with a sharp gesture. You'll be silent until I give you permission to speak, he said coldly. You've disgraced yourself and your family quite enough for one evening. The casual cruelty in his voice sent a chill through the crowd. Even some of the men who had been calling for Kaelan's blood looked uncomfortable with Morrison's treatment of Isabella. Kaelan stepped forward, his body tense with controlled fury. You will not speak to her that way. Morrison laughed a sound like breaking glass. The savage gives orders now. How charming. Don't worry, Buck. I'll beat the rebellion out of her soon enough. A few months of proper discipline and she'll remember her place. The threat hung in the air like poison, and Isabella felt something break inside her chest. The thought of being trapped in a marriage with this monster, of spending the rest of her life under his cruel control. was worse than any death she could imagine. "I'll never marry you," she said, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. "I'd rather die first." "That can be arranged," Morrison said casually. "Though I think a more fitting punishment would be to make you watch while I skin your lover alive." The naked sadism in his voice sent a shockwave through the gathered men. These were hard people accustomed to violence, but Morrison's casual discussion of torture crossed a line that even they found disturbing. "That's enough," Harper said sharply. "Marcus, you're upset. Perhaps you should bite on." "I'm not upset," Morrison interrupted. "I'm disgusted. Disgusted that a woman of supposedly good breeding could sink so low as to rut with an animal." Kaelan's control finally snapped. He moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, covering the distance between them in 2 quick strides. His hand shot out to grab Morrison by the throat, lifting the smaller man nearly off his feet. "Apologize," Kaelan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Apologize to her now, or I will forget that I came here in peace." For a moment, Morrison's arrogant mask slipped, revealing the coward underneath. His face turned purple as he clawed uselessly at Kaelan's iron grip. "Kaelan, don't," Isabella pleaded. "He's not worth it." Reluctantly, Kaelan released his hold, allowing Morrison to stumble backward, gasping for air. But the damage was done. The entire courtyard had seen Morrison's humiliation, and the effect on the crowd was electric. "Kill him!" Morrison wheezed, his voice raw with fury and embarrassment. "Kill them both. They're abominations against God and nature." But something had changed in the crowd's mood. Seeing Morrison's cruelty directed against Isabella had reminded many of these men that she was one of their own, a young woman they had watched grow up. The idea of handing her over to a man who clearly intended to abuse her didn't sit well with their sense of honor. "Maybe we should hear what the girl has to say," suggested Jim Crawford, one of the older ranchers. "She's got a right to speak for herself." "She's got no rights," Morrison snarled. "She's my property now, bought and paid for." "Actually," Harper said quietly, "the engagement was never formalized. No contracts were signed." Morrison's face went white with rage. "Are you backing out of our agreement?" "I'm saying that perhaps we acted hastily," Harper replied carefully. "Recent events have complicated the situation." "Complicated?" Morrison's voice rose to a near shriek. "Your daughter has been defiled by a savage, and you call it complicated." "I call it her choice." Harper said the words, seeming to surprise him as much as everyone else. Isabella stared at her father in amazement. For the first time in her life, he was acknowledging her right to make her own decisions, even if he disagreed with them. "Her choice?" Morrison looked around the crowd as if seeking support for his outrage. "Women don't get to choose. They obey their fathers and then their husbands. That's the natural order." "Maybe it's time for a new order," suggested another voice from the crowd. Morrison spun around to face this new opposition, his face twisted with fury. "You're all being bewitched by Apache magic. Can't you see what's happening here?" "What I see," said Jim Crawford, "is a young lady who's found herself a man willing to die for her. That's more than some husbands offer." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many of these men had daughters of their own, and the thought of forcing them into marriages with men like Morrison was becoming increasingly distasteful. "This is madness," Morrison declared. "I won't stand for it. If you won't deal with this situation properly, I'll handle it myself." His hand moved toward the pistol at his side, but before he could draw it, Sheriff Briggs stepped forward. "I don't think that's a good idea, son," Briggs said quietly. "You're outnumbered here, and folks are starting to see things differently." Morrison looked around the courtyard with growing desperation, realizing that the crowd that had moments before been calling for Apache blood was now turning against him. "This is all wrong," he said, his voice taking on a plaintive quality. "They're the enemy. We're supposed to be killing them, not negotiating with them." "Maybe," said Colonel Brennan slowly, "we've been thinking about this all wrong. Maybe the real enemy isn't the Apache." Morrison stared at the grizzled soldier in shock. "You can't be serious." "I've been fighting Indians for 20 years, Brennan said. "And in all that time, I've never seen one willing to walk into an armed camp to prevent bloodshed. That takes courage." "It takes stupidity," Morrison protested. "No," Brennan said thoughtfully. "Stupidity is starting a war you can't win. And if what this young man says is true, if his uncle really does command the loyalty of the largest Apache band in the territory, then a war is exactly what we can't win." The admission from the most experienced Indian fighter in Silver Creek sent a shock through the crowd. If Brennan was having second thoughts about the wisdom of warfare, then perhaps it was time for everyone to reconsider. "So what are you suggesting?" Harper asked. "I'm suggesting we give peace a chance," Brennan said. "One meeting. If it works, we avoid a war that could destroy us all. If it doesn't, we're no worse off than we are now." Morrison looked around the courtyard with growing horror as he realized that his moment of revenge was slipping away. The crowd that had been ready to commit massacre was now talking about peace negotiations. "You're all cowards," he spat. "Cowards and fools. When the Apache come for your scalps, remember that you chose this. And when our children grow up in a world without constant warfare," Isabella said quietly, "they'll remember that we chose hope over hatred." Morrison's face contorted with one final spasm of rage before he turned and stalked away, his expensive boots clicking against the stone courtyard. As he disappeared into the darkness, Isabella felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "So," Harper said, turning back to Kaelan, "when can you arrange this meeting with your uncle?" "Give me 3 days," Kaelan replied. "I'll need time to travel to his camp and explain what has happened." "And if he refuses?" "Then we'll face whatever comes together," Isabella said, her hand finding Kaelan's. "But at least we'll have tried." Harper nodded slowly, then looked around at the faces of his supporters. "What do you say? Are we willing to give peace a chance?" The response wasn't unanimous, but it was strong enough. These men had come prepared for war, but they were going home with the possibility of peace instead. As the crowd began to disperse, Harper approached his daughter and her lover. "I still don't understand this," he said quietly. "I still don't see how it can work, but I'm willing to try for your sake." "Thank you, Father," Isabella said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't thank me yet," Harper warned. "If this goes wrong, if people die because I chose to trust instead of fight, their blood will be on all our hands." "And if it goes right," Kaelan said, "their children will grow up in a world where love is stronger than hatred." Harper studied the young Apache warrior for a long moment, then extended his hand. 3 days, he said as they shook. "Make them count." As dawn broke over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Isabella and Kaelan stood together, watching the last of the armed men ride away. The confrontation that should have ended in blood had instead ended in hope, fragile and uncertain though it might be. But even as they celebrated this small victory, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. In the Apache camp 15 miles away, Itu was discovering his cousin's absence and drawing his own conclusions about where Kaelan had gone. And in the territorial capital, word was already spreading about the failed raid reaching ears that had their own plans for the Apache problem. The battle for peace had been won, but the war for the future was just beginning. The 3 days that followed felt both endless and impossibly brief. Isabella spent them in a strange limbo, no longer a prisoner in her father's house, but not yet truly free. The servants whispered when they thought she couldn't hear their voices, carrying a mixture of scandal and sympathy that made her skin crawl with discomfort. She had become something unprecedented in Silver Creek society, a woman who had openly defied convention and somehow emerged victorious, at least temporarily. Thomas Harper watched his daughter with the careful attention of a man studying a fascinating but potentially dangerous creature. He seemed torn between pride at her courage and bewilderment at her choices, as if she had suddenly revealed herself to be an entirely different species than the one he thought he'd raised. "Are you certain about this?" he asked her on the second morning, finding her standing at the window of his study, staring out toward the mountains where Kaelan had disappeared. "About which part?" Isabella replied without turning around. "About loving him, about trusting him, or about believing that peace is possible?" "All of it," Harper said heavily. "Any of it." Isabella finally turned to face her father, seeing the genuine worry etched into every line of his weathered face. "I've never been certain of anything in my life, Father. But I'd rather bet everything on love than live safely with hatred. And if you're wrong, if he doesn't return, or if his uncle refuses to meet with us, then at least I'll know I tried to build something instead of just tearing things down." Harper nodded slowly, though she could see he remained unconvinced. "The territorial governor sent word yesterday. He's heard about what happened here." Isabella felt her stomach clench with dread. "What kind of word?" "The kind that suggests he's not pleased with my decision to negotiate rather than eliminate the Apache threat." Harper moved to pour himself a whiskey despite the early hour. "Governor Williams has his own ideas about how to handle the Indian problem." "What does that mean for us?" "It means our window for achieving peace is smaller than we thought. If Kaelan doesn't return with his uncle soon, the governor may take matters into his own hands." The ominous words hung between them like a storm cloud, casting shadows over what little hope they had managed to build. Isabella understood the implication. Even if they succeeded in negotiating a local peace, larger political forces might still crush it. But before she could voice her fears, the sound of galloping horses reached them from the courtyard. Isabella rushed to the window and felt her heart leap as she saw a familiar figure dismounting near the front steps. Kaelan had returned, but he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 4 other Apache warriors, their faces painted for war and their weapons clearly visible. The sight of them sent a ripple of alarm through the household staff, who began scurrying for cover as if expecting an attack. "Father," Isabella said urgently, "you need to come outside with me, right now." Harper drained his whiskey glass and straightened his shoulders, like a man preparing for execution. "I suppose there's no point in delaying the inevitable." They emerged from the house to find Kaelan standing in the center of the courtyard, his dark eyes searching until they found Isabella's face. The relief and joy in his expression made her heart sing, but the tension radiating from his companions told a different story. The Apache warrior who stepped forward had Kaelan's strong jawline and intelligent eyes. But where Kaelan projected quiet strength, this man radiated barely contained violence. War paint covered half his face in stark black and white patterns, and the coup feathers in his hair spoke of many battles won. "This is my cousin Etu," Kaelan said formally. "He speaks for my uncle in matters of war and peace." Etu's gaze swept over the assembled whites with unconcealed contempt before settling on Isabella. When he spoke, his English was heavily accented, but perfectly clear. "So, this is the white woman who has bewitched my cousin's mind." "She has opened his heart," Isabella replied calmly, refusing to be intimidated. "As he has opened mine." "Hearts," Etu spat. "While you play at love, our people prepare for war. The white soldiers mass at Fort Wingate. The governor calls for our complete destruction, and my cousin wastes time with romantic foolishness." Kaelan stepped between them, his voice hard with authority. Etu, you gave your word that you would listen. Honor it. I gave my word to hear this white chief speak of peace, Etu replied. I did not promise to pretend that love between enemies means anything. Harper cleared his throat, drawing the attention of both warriors. If I may, he said carefully, I appreciate that you've come this far. It shows good faith on both sides. It shows that my cousin has more influence than wisdom, Etu said bluntly. But Chief Manuelito wishes to hear what promises the white man offers this time. This time? Isabella asked, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. Your people have made promises before, Kaelan explained quietly. Treaties that were broken as soon as they became inconvenient. Land that was granted and then taken back. Peace that lasted only until someone found gold or silver in Apache territory. This is different, Harper insisted. We're talking about a real peace negotiated in good faith between equals. Etu's laugh was harsh as winter wind. Equals? When have white men ever considered Apache to be their equals? When they fall in love with them, Isabella said boldly. When they see past the color of skin to the person underneath. One couple does not make peace between nations. Etu replied, though his voice had lost some of its edge. Love is a luxury for those who do not have to bury their children. The pain in his words was unmistakable, and Isabella felt her anger transform into sympathy. Have you lost children? Etu's war paint couldn't hide the grief that flickered across his features. My son, my daughter, both killed by soldiers who said they came in peace. The simple statement hit Isabella like a physical blow. She began to understand why this proud warrior looked at her with such suspicion in his eyes. She represented the people who had murdered his family. I'm sorry, she said softly. No parent should have to endure such loss. Sorry does not bring back the dead, Etu replied, but his voice had lost its harsh edge. Sorry does not stop the soldiers who march toward our winter camps even now. What soldiers? Harper demanded, his face going pale. Kaelan and Etu exchanged a look before Kaelan answered. Governor Williams has mobilized 2 companies of cavalry. They're 3 days' march from the largest Apache settlement. Dear God, Harper breathed. He's planning to attack while we're trying to negotiate. The governor does not want negotiation, Etu said grimly. He wants extermination. Your meeting was a trap to keep us talking while his soldiers moved into position. No, Isabella said desperately. That's not true. We came to you in good faith. Perhaps you did, Etu acknowledged. But your leaders play a deeper game. While you speak of love and peace, they prepare for slaughter. Harper's face was ashen with shock and growing rage. I swear to you I knew nothing about this. Williams never told me about any military action. Because he does not trust you, Kaelan said gently. Your willingness to negotiate makes you suspect in his eyes. The revelation hit Harper like a thunderbolt. His own government had betrayed him, using his peace efforts as a distraction while they prepared for genocide. The political calculation was brutally simple. Let the naive local officials pursue diplomacy while the professionals handled the final solution. How long do we have? Harper asked, his voice hollow with defeat. The soldiers will reach the winter camp tomorrow at dawn, Etu said. Unless they are stopped. Can your people escape in time? Some might, but there are elders who cannot travel quickly, children too young to ride hard. Many will die. Isabella felt the world spinning around her as the full horror of the situation became clear. While she and Kaelan had been celebrating their small victory in preventing local violence, much larger forces had been moving toward a massacre that would dwarf anything Silver Creek's men might have accomplished. There has to be something we can do, she said desperately. There is, Etu said, his hand moving to rest on his tomahawk. We can die fighting instead of dying like sheep. Or, Kaelan said quietly, we can try something that has never been attempted before. All eyes turned to him as he stepped forward, his face grave with purpose. What if we don't fight the soldiers? He said. What if we join them? The suggestion was so unexpected that for a moment nobody spoke. Then Etu exploded in fury. Join them! Join the men who come to murder our families. Not join their cause, Kaelan said quickly. Join their march. Intercept them before they reach the camp. Force them to see that not all Apache are their enemies. You're talking about suicide, Harper said. Those soldiers have their orders. They won't stop to listen to reason. They might, Isabella said slowly, beginning to understand Kaelan's plan. If they see that some Apache are willing to work with whites instead of fighting them. And when they decide to kill us anyway? Etu demanded. Then we die for something meaningful, Kaelan replied. We die trying to save our people instead of just adding to the body count. Etu stared at his cousin for a long moment, his painted face a mask of conflicting emotions. This is madness. Yes, Kaelan agreed. But it's the kind of madness that sometimes changes the world. Harper was pacing now, his mind clearly racing through possibilities and obstacles. Even if we could reach the soldiers in time, even if we could convince them to listen, what makes you think they would disobey their orders? Because their orders come from politicians who have never seen the reality of what they're commanding. Isabella said, the plan taking shape in her mind. But soldiers are human beings. When they see families, children, people who want peace instead of war. You're betting a lot on the conscience of men trained to kill, Etu observed. I'm betting on their humanity, Isabella replied. The same humanity that allowed love to grow between your cousin and me. Etu studied her face intently, as if trying to read her soul. You would ride with us, risk your life for people you have never met. They're Kaelan's people, Isabella said simply. That makes them my people too. The simple declaration seemed to hit Etu like a physical blow. For the first time since his arrival, his expression softened slightly. You speak as Apache women speak, he said quietly, with courage and loyalty. Then perhaps there is hope for peace between us, Isabella replied. Harper had stopped pacing and was staring at his daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. Isabella, you can't be serious about this. It's too dangerous. Everything worthwhile is dangerous, Father. You taught me that. I taught you to be careful, not reckless. And now I'm teaching myself to be brave instead of safe. Before Harper could respond, the sound of more horses reached them from the main road. But these weren't Apache ponies. They were the heavy mounts of cavalry, and they were approaching at a gallop. Company coming, one of Etu's warriors called out in Apache. Through the dust cloud, Isabella could make out the blue uniforms of territorial soldiers, led by a young lieutenant whose face was flushed with urgency. Mayor Harper, the officer called out as he reined in his lathered horse. I have orders from Governor Williams. You're to surrender any Apache present to military custody immediately. Harper stepped forward, his face grim with understanding. On what authority? By order of the territorial governor and the United States Army, the lieutenant replied formally. These individuals are considered enemy combatants and are to be detained pending transport to the reservation. They came here under a flag of truce, Harper protested. They're here to negotiate peace. Their intentions are irrelevant, the officer said coldly. My orders are clear. Etu's hand moved to his weapon, but Kaelan caught his wrist. Wait, he said quietly. Wait for what? Etu snarled. For them to put us in chains. Wait for wisdom to prevail over fear, Kaelan replied, his eyes never leaving the lieutenant's face. Isabella stepped forward, placing herself between the soldiers and the Apache warriors. "Lieutenant, what's your name?" "Lieutenant Morrison, ma'am," the young officer replied, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Isabella's blood ran cold at the familiar surname. "Any relation to Marcus Morrison?" "My older brother, ma'am." The connection explained everything. Marcus had clearly used his family's military connections to ensure that his humiliation would be avenged, even if he couldn't be present to enjoy it personally. "I see," Isabella said carefully. "And did your brother explain the full situation to your superiors?" "He explained that you've been corrupted by Apache influence and that your father has been compromised in his judgment," Morrison replied, his young face showing discomfort with his role. "And you believe that?" "It doesn't matter what I believe, ma'am. I have my orders. Orders to arrest unarmed men who came here seeking peace. Orders to arrest enemy combatants who pose a threat to territorial security." Isabella could see the conflict in the young man's eyes. He was clearly uncomfortable with his mission, but military discipline kept him from questioning his superior's judgment. "Lieutenant Tar," Harper said firmly, "I'm still the mayor of this town. These men are my guests here under my protection. With respect, sir, your authority doesn't extend to matters of territorial security. Governor Williams has assumed direct control of all Apache-related issues, including the right to execute prisoners without trial," Kaelan asked quietly. Morrison's face went pale. That's not... My orders are to transport them to Fort Wingate for processing." "Processing?" E2 repeated with bitter laughter. "Is that what you call murder now?" "Nobody's going to be murdered," Morrison protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then why are 2 companies of cavalry marching toward Apache winter camps?" Isabella asked. "What kind of processing requires that much firepower?" Morrison's shock was genuine, and Isabella realized that the young officer had been told nothing about the larger military operation. He had been sent on what he thought was a simple arrest mission, unaware that it was part of a coordinated campaign of extermination. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said slowly. "Your brother didn't mention that part," Isabella pressed. "That while you're arresting negotiators, other soldiers are preparing to massacre families." "That's not... The Army doesn't target civilians." "Tell that to the Apache children who won't see tomorrow's sunset," E2 said grimly. Morrison looked around at the faces surrounding him, reading the truth in their expressions. His certainty began to crumble as he realized he might be part of something much darker than he had been told. "Lieutenant," Harper said gently, "you seem like a decent man. Are you prepared to be responsible for genocide?" "It's not genocide," Morrison said weakly. "It's military action against hostile forces." "Hostile infants?" Isabella asked. "Hostile grandmothers, hostile children who have never held a weapon." Morrison's face was ashen now, the full horror of the situation beginning to penetrate his military conditioning. "There must be some mistake. The Army doesn't... We're not..." "You're not what?" Kaelan asked. "You're not planning to kill everyone in the winter camps. You're not following orders to eliminate the Apache threat once and for all." The young officer looked like a man whose entire world was collapsing around him. His hand moved uncertainly toward his sidearm, but his heart was clearly no longer in his mission. I should report back to my commanding officer," he stammered. "And tell him what?" Harper asked. "That you found no Apache here, that the reports of their presence were mistaken." Morrison stared at him in confusion. "But they're right here. I can see them." "Are you certain?" Isabella asked softly. "Are you absolutely certain that you saw Apache warriors at the Harper estate today?" The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Morrison's gaze moved from face to face, reading the silent plea in their eyes. I was told they would be here, but you found nothing," Harper said firmly. Just a peaceful household going about its normal business. Morrison looked at the Apache warriors, who had remained perfectly still throughout the exchange. His military training warred with his conscience duty, battling against humanity in his young heart. "If I report that I found nothing," he said slowly, "and my superiors discover otherwise, then you followed your orders to the best of your ability," Isabella said. "You can't be blamed for the poor intelligence you were given. And the attack on the winter camps." "What attack?" Kaelan asked innocently. "I'm sure the army would never target civilian populations without proper cause." Morrison understood the game they were playing, and after a long moment, he nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. The army operates under strict rules of engagement. Rules that require verification of hostile intent before taking action," Harper added helpfully. "Exactly," Morrison said, his voice growing stronger. "And if such verification were delayed, it would only be proper to postpone any military action until the situation could be clarified." Isabella felt a surge of hope. This young officer might just be their salvation, the key to preventing the massacre that loomed over the Apache camps. "How long would such a delay last?" she asked carefully. Morrison considered the question, his mind clearly working through military protocols. Proper verification procedures could take several days, perhaps a week if the situation is particularly complex. And during that time, no action could be taken without proper authorization from territorial command. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it might buy them enough time to find one. If they could delay the attack long enough to get word to Washington to bring public attention to what was happening, they might be able to prevent the genocide that Governor Williams was planning. "Lieutenant," Harper said formally, "I want to thank you for your thorough investigation of this matter. Your professionalism does credit to the uniform." Morrison straightened his shoulders, some of his confidence returning. "Just doing my duty, sir, ensuring that the Army acts only on reliable intelligence." As the young officer prepared to leave, E2 stepped forward. "Lieutenant Morrison," he said quietly. Morrison turned his hand instinctively, moving to his weapon before he caught himself. "Your conscience honors you," E2 said simply. "Your children will be proud of what you did today." Morrison nodded stiffly, clearly moved despite himself. "I hope so. I truly hope so." After the soldiers had gone, the Apache warriors seemed to exhale collectively, the tension draining from their rigid postures. "We have gained time," E2 said, "but not much. Eventually they will discover the truth." "Then we use the time we have," Kaelan said. "We find Chief Manuelito and convince him to bring the entire tribal council to meet with the territorial authorities." "They will never agree to such a meeting," one of E2's warriors protested. "Too much risk, too little trust." "Then we make them an offer they cannot refuse," Isabella said, the plan forming in her mind even as she spoke. "We offer them the one thing that might make peace possible." "Which is?" Harper asked. Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to propose would change everything, not just for herself, but for everyone she loved. "We offer them me," she said simply. "I'll go to the Apache as a hostage, a guarantee of white intentions. If the territorial government tries to betray the peace negotiations, they'll have to explain how the mayor's daughter ended up dead in an Apache camp." The silence that followed her proposal was deafening. Everyone stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Absolutely not," Harper said flatly. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for politics." "It's not sacrifice, Father. It's investment. In a future where children don't have to grow up hating each other." "Isabella," Kaelan said gently, "what you propose is incredibly dangerous. My people are frightened angry. Some might see you as a symbol of everything they hate about whites. And others might see me as proof that not all whites are their enemies, she replied. The risk is worth taking. E2 studied her with something approaching respect. You would truly do this? Leave your people to live among ours? I would do anything to prevent more death, Isabella said firmly, and anything to be with the man I love. Even if it means never returning to the world you know. Isabella looked around at the estate where she had spent her entire life, at the father who had both protected and constrained her, at the familiar comfort of a life she had never truly chosen. This world was never really mine, she said quietly. I was just a guest here waiting for my real life to begin. Harper's face crumpled with pain and pride in equal measure. You've become someone I hardly recognize, and yet I've never been more proud of you. Then support me in this, Isabella pleaded. Help me become the bridge between our peoples. And if I can't protect you once you're gone, then you'll know that I died trying to build something better than what we have now. Itu stepped forward, his war paint unable to hide the emotion in his dark eyes. If you come with us, you come as family, as Kaelan's woman under the protection of our clan. Any who harm you will answer to me. And if the peace negotiations fail, if the soldiers come anyway, then we die together, Itu said simply, fighting side by side as allies instead of enemies. Isabella felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what these proud warriors were offering her. Not just sanctuary, but true acceptance, a place where she could belong, not because of her birth or her father's position, but because of her choices and her courage. When do we leave? She asked. Now, Kaelan said urgently, before anyone else comes looking for us, before the military changes its mind about waiting. Isabella nodded and turned to face her father one last time. I love you, Father, and I'm grateful for everything you've given me. But now I have to give something back to the world. Harper embraced his daughter fiercely, his tears soaking into her hair. Be careful, my dear one. Be brave, but be careful. I'll be both, she promised. And someday, when this is all over, I'll come back to visit the bridge we're building together. As Isabella prepared to leave the only home she had ever known, she felt no fear, only a profound sense of rightness. This was what she had been meant to do, what all her life had been leading toward. Love had shown her the way, and now courage would carry her forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. The sun was setting as they rode away from Silver Creek. Isabella mounted on one of her father's horses beside Kaelan, while Itu and his warriors surrounded them like an honor guard. Behind them lay everything familiar and safe. Ahead lay everything unknown and dangerous. But as Kaelan reached over to take her hand, Isabella knew she was exactly where she belonged. They were riding toward either salvation or destruction, but they were riding toward it together, and that made all the difference in the world. The Apache camp materialized from the desert landscape like a vision born of earth and sky, hidden so perfectly among the red rocks and twisted juniper that Isabella might have ridden past it a dozen times without noticing. As their small party crested the final ridge, she gasped at the sight spread before them. Dozens of hide lodges arranged in careful patterns. Smoke rising from cook fires, children playing between the dwellings, while their mothers worked and their grandmothers told stories in the fading light. It looked nothing like the savage encampment she had been taught to imagine. Instead, she saw a community, a place where families lived and loved and dreamed of better days, just like the people of Silver Creek. The realization hit her with stunning force. These were not the faceless enemies of her father's political speeches, but human beings with hopes and fears as real as her own. As they descended toward the camp, Isabella became aware of the sudden silence that fell over the settlement. Work stopped, conversation ceased, and every face turned toward the approaching riders. She could feel the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes studying her, measuring her, trying to determine what threat or opportunity she might represent. Kaelan moved his horse closer to hers, his voice low and reassuring. "Do not be afraid. They are curious, not hostile." "I'm not afraid," Isabella replied, and was surprised to find that it was true. Despite being the only white person for miles in any direction, despite the stories she had heard about Apache cruelty, she felt no fear. Perhaps it was Kaelan's presence beside her, or perhaps it was the simple humanity she could see in the faces around her. But this felt less like entering enemy territory than like coming home. An elderly man emerged from the largest lodge at the center of the camp, his gray hair braided with silver ornaments, and his weathered face marked by years of wisdom and sorrow. Even without being told, Isabella knew she was looking at Chief Manuelito, Kaelan's uncle, and the leader of this band of free Apache. His dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that seemed to look straight through to her soul. "Nephew," he said in accented English, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. "You returned to us with unexpected cargo." Kaelan dismounted and helped Isabella down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Uncle, may I present Isabella Harper, daughter of the White Chief in Silver Creek. She comes to us seeking sanctuary and offering herself as guarantee of her people's good intentions." Chief Manuelito studied Isabella with the same careful attention he might give to a potentially dangerous weapon. "She comes willingly." "I come because I love your nephew," Isabella said, stepping forward and meeting the chief's gaze directly. "And because I believe our peoples can live in peace if we have the courage to try." A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Some voices expressing surprise, others skepticism. Isabella caught fragments of conversation in Apache, unable to understand the words, but reading volumes in the tones and expressions of the speakers. "Love," Chief Manuelito repeated thoughtfully. "A powerful force, but not always a wise one. Love has started as many wars as it has prevented." "Then perhaps it's time for love to prevent one instead," Isabella replied. The chief's weathered face creased in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You speak boldly for one so young. Tell me, white woman, what do you know of our ways? What do you know of the hardships you would face among us?" "I know that I have much to learn," Isabella admitted. "But I also know that learning begins with listening, and listening begins with respect." This time the chief's smile was unmistakable. "You answer well. But words are wind unless backed by action. Are you prepared to prove your commitment to peace?" "How would you have me prove it?" Chief Manuelito gestured toward a group of women who had gathered near one of the cook fires. "Our women will judge your worth better than I. If they accept you, if they find sincerity in your heart, then perhaps we can speak of peace. If not..." He didn't need to finish the threat. Isabella understood that her fate, and possibly the fate of two peoples, rested on the opinion of Apache women who had every reason to hate her. "I understand," she said simply. As Isabella approached the group of women, she felt her heart hammering against her ribs. These were the wives and mothers and daughters of warriors, women who had buried their dead and mourned their lost ones. In their eyes, she represented everything that had brought sorrow to their lives. The oldest woman in the group stepped forward, her gray hair streaked with silver and her lined face bearing the wisdom of decades. When she spoke, her English was careful but clear. "I am Ayana, grandmother, to Etu, mother, to the fallen. You say you come in peace, but your people's peace has brought us only death. Why should we trust you?" Isabella felt the weight of generations of betrayal and broken promises in the woman's words. How could she possibly answer for the sins of her entire race? How could she prove that she was different from the countless whites who had lied and cheated and murdered their way across Apache lands? You shouldn't trust me, Isabella said quietly. Not yet. Trust must be earned, and I have done nothing to earn yours. But I'm willing to try. Ayanna studied her face with the penetrating gaze of one who had learned to read souls. What would you sacrifice for this peace you speak of? Everything, Isabella replied without hesitation. My home, my family, my old life. Everything I was so that I might become something better. And if we demanded your life? If the only way to guarantee peace was your death? Isabella met the old woman's eyes steadily. Then I would give it gladly, knowing that my death might save other lives. The silence that followed her words was profound. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their games forgotten, as they watched the strange white woman who spoke of dying for peace. Finally, Ayanna nodded slowly. You speak truth. I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. But truth alone is not enough. Can you work? Can you contribute to our survival? I can learn, Isabella said. I can cook and sew and tend the sick. I can help with the children and the elderly. I may not know your ways, but I'm willing to learn them. Another woman stepped forward, younger than Ayanna, but with the same keen intelligence in her dark eyes. I am Itzel, wife to Itu mother, to the children he lost. If you stay among us, you will share our dangers as well as our protection. Are you prepared for that? Isabella thought of the soldiers marching toward this very camp, of the violence that could erupt at any moment, of the precarious position she would occupy as the only white person in a community surrounded by enemies. I'm prepared, she said firmly. Itzel nodded approvingly. Then we will teach you what you need to know. But first, you must understand what it means to be Apache. Come. The women led Isabella to a secluded area near the edge of the camp, where a small fire burned beneath a star-filled sky. As they settled in a circle around the flames, Ayanna began to speak in a voice that carried the weight of oral tradition passed down through countless generations. We are the Diné, the people, she said. We have lived on this land since the world was young, following the old ways taught to us by the spirits of our ancestors. We take only what we need from the earth, and we give back more than we take. This is the Apache way. Isabella listened with rapt attention as Ayanna spoke of a way of life that was completely foreign to everything she had known. The Apache saw themselves not as conquerors of the land, but as its caretakers living in harmony with the natural world, rather than trying to dominate it. Your people see the earth as something to be owned and used, Itzel added. They dig scars in the mountains, poison the rivers, kill the buffalo for sport. They take everything and give nothing back. Not all of us, Isabella protested gently. Some of us see the beauty in what you describe. Some of us want to learn a better way. Perhaps Ayanna said thoughtfully. But you are few, and those who think like you have little power among your people. As the evening wore on, Isabella found herself drawn deeper into conversation with the Apache women. They spoke of their children, their hopes for the future, their fears about the approaching soldiers. She learned about their customs and traditions, their complex kinship systems, and their deep spiritual beliefs. But more than that, she learned about their humanity. These women laughed and cried and worried and dreamed just like the women of Silver Creek. They loved their families with fierce devotion and would do anything to protect them from harm. The only difference was that their skin was a different color, and their culture followed different patterns. When the formal questioning was over, Ayanna placed a weathered hand on Isabella's shoulder. You may stay among us, she said simply. Not as a guest or a prisoner, but as family. Kaelan's woman under our protection. Isabella felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the full impact of the old woman's words hit her. She had been accepted, truly accepted, into a community that had every reason to reject her. For the first time in her life, she felt as if she truly belonged somewhere. "Thank you," she whispered. "You honor me more than I deserve." "We honor the courage you have shown," Ayanna replied, "and the love that brought you to us. But remember, acceptance is just the beginning. Now you must prove yourself worthy of the trust we are placing in you." As the women began to disperse back to their families, Kaelan appeared at Isabella's side. His face was grave with concern, and she could see worry lines creasing his forehead. "What is it?" she asked immediately, sensing that something was wrong. "Riders approaching from the east," he said quietly, moving fast and trying to stay hidden. Isabella's blood ran cold. "The soldiers!" "We don't know yet. E2 has taken scouts to investigate, but we must prepare for the worst." Around them, the peaceful camp was transforming with startling efficiency into a fortress. Women gathered the children and led them to sheltered areas, while warriors emerged from lodges, carrying weapons and taking up defensive positions. The entire community moved with the practiced coordination of people who had faced such threats many times before. Chief Manuelito appeared beside them, his face grim with the weight of leadership. "If these are soldiers come to destroy us, what message would you send to your father?" he asked Isabella. "That we tried," she said without hesitation. "That love was stronger than hatred, even if hatred was stronger than peace." The chief nodded approvingly. "You face death with honor. That is good. It means you have learned something of the Apache way already." But before Isabella could respond, E2 came racing back into camp on his lathered horse, his painted face alive with excitement rather than alarm. "Uncle," he called out, "you need to see this. All of you need to see this." He gestured towards the eastern ridge, where a line of riders was silhouetted against the star-filled sky. But as Isabella studied the approaching figures, she realized with shock that these weren't soldiers at all. Leading the group was Thomas Harper, her father mounted on his favorite bay gelding and carrying a white flag of truce. Behind him rode Sheriff Briggs Colonel Brennan and nearly a dozen other prominent citizens of Silver Creek. They moved slowly and openly, making no attempt at concealment or stealth. "Father," Isabella breathed, hardly daring to believe her eyes. As the riders approached the camp, Harper called out in a voice that carried clearly across the desert air, "Chief Manuelito, I request permission to enter your territory under a flag of truce. I come seeking my daughter and hoping to discuss terms for a lasting peace between our peoples." The chief looked at Isabella with raised eyebrows. "Your father is either very brave or very foolish to come here with so few men." "He's both," Isabella said, torn between pride and terror at her father's unexpected arrival. "But mostly he's a man who loves his daughter enough to risk everything for her." Chief Manuelito considered for a moment, then nodded to E2. "Bring them in, but keep them under guard. We will hear what the White Chief has to say." As the Silver Creek delegation entered the Apache camp, Isabella could see the amazement and discomfort on their faces. Like her, they had expected to find a savage encampment full of bloodthirsty warriors. Instead, they found families gathered around cook fires, children playing innocent games, and grandmothers telling stories under the stars. Harper dismounted and walked directly to where Isabella stood beside Chief Manuelito. His face was a battlefield of relief and reproach as he looked at his daughter. "Isabella," he said simply, "you're safe." "I'm more than safe, Father," she replied. "I'm home." The words hit Harper like a physical blow, and Isabella could see him struggling to understand how his daughter could possibly feel at home among people he had been taught to fear and hate. "I've come to bring you back," he said quietly, "and to try to prevent the war that's coming." "What war?" Chief Manuelito asked sharply. Harper's face was grim as he explained. Governor Williams has ignored Lieutenant Morrison's report about finding no Apache at my estate. He's convinced that his nephew was deceived or intimidated into lying. 3 companies of cavalry are now marching toward this location with orders to eliminate all Apache resistance. The news hit the camp like a thunderbolt. Warriors who had been relaxing around the fires suddenly tensed hands, moving to weapons, while women began gathering their children closer. "How long do we have?" A2 demanded. "They'll be here by dawn," Harper replied. 6 hours, maybe less." Chief Manuelito's face showed no emotion, but Isabella could see the wheels turning behind his dark eyes as he processed this information and its implications. "Why do you warn us?" he asked. "Why risk your own life to save your enemies?" "Because they're not my enemies," Harper said firmly. "My daughter has shown me that much. And because the man who wants to marry her is using military connections to ensure that anyone who opposes him is eliminated." "Marcus Morrison," Isabella said, the pieces falling into place. "His family has significant influence with the territorial government," Harper confirmed. "When you humiliated him publicly, when you chose Kaelan over him, you made a very dangerous enemy." "So this is all about revenge?" Kaelan asked, his voice tight with anger. "Partly," Harper admitted. "But it's also about power and politics and the age-old belief that the only solution to the Indian problem is a final solution." Isabella felt sick as she realized how her personal choices had become entangled with larger forces of hatred and violence. Her love for Kaelan hadn't just endangered them, it had provided an excuse for genocide. "What do you propose?" Chief Manuelito asked. Harper looked around at the faces surrounding him. Apache warriors and Silver Creek citizens united for the moment by their shared humanity and their desire to prevent bloodshed. "We stand together," he said simply. "Apache and white side by side, and we show those soldiers that we refuse to be part of their war." "They'll shoot us all down like dogs," Colonel Brennan protested. "Military discipline doesn't allow for questioning orders." "It does, if the orders are illegal," Sheriff Briggs said unexpectedly. "Killing unarmed civilians is murder regardless of what uniform you're wearing." Isabella stared at the grizzled lawman in amazement. "You would stand with us?" "I've been enforcing the law for 30 years, Briggs replied gruffly. "I know the difference between justice and vengeance. What Morrison's planning isn't justice." One by one, the other men from Silver Creek began to voice their agreement. These weren't bleeding heart idealists or naive dreamers. They were hardened frontiersmen who had learned to respect courage wherever they found it. And what they had found in this Apache camp was a people willing to fight and die for their families just like themselves. "So what's the plan?" A2 asked. Chief Manuelito stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of natural leadership. "We do not run. We do not hide. We stand here together, and we show these soldiers what peace looks like." "And if they attack anyway?" someone asked. "Then we defend ourselves," the chief replied simply. "But we defend ourselves as allies, not enemies." Isabella felt a chill of fear mixed with exhilaration as she realized what they were proposing. It was madness, certainly, standing against trained soldiers with nothing but moral authority and the power of unified purpose. But it was also magnificent, a gesture that could either unite two peoples or destroy them both. "I want to stand with you," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. "Whatever happens, I want to be here." "As do I," Harper added, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter has found something precious here, something worth fighting for." As the night wore on, the two communities began to blend together in ways that would have seemed impossible just days before. Apache warriors shared food with Silver Creek ranchers, while white women learned songs from Apache grandmothers. Children from both cultures played together around the fires, their laughter carrying across the desert like a promise of what the future might hold. Isabella found herself moving between groups, translating not just languages, but cultures, helping people see past their preconceptions to the humanity that lay beneath. It was exhausting work, but also exhilarating. She was becoming the bridge she had always dreamed of being. As dawn approached, the combined community arranged itself in a defensive formation that was also a statement of unity. Apache warriors stood shoulder to shoulder with Silver Creek citizens, their weapons at ready, but pointed toward the ground. Women and children gathered in the center, protected by a circle of people who had chosen cooperation over conflict. Chief Manuelito and Thomas Harper stood at the front of the formation, two leaders who had found common ground in their love for the same brave young woman. Behind them, Isabella and Kaelan waited hand in hand, their love, the catalyst that had brought two worlds together. The sun was just breaking over the eastern mountains when the sound of approaching cavalry reached them. 3 companies of blue-uniformed soldiers crested the ridge and deployed in battle formation, their rifles gleaming in the morning light and their faces hard with purpose. At their head rode Captain Morrison, Marcus's cousin, his scarred face twisted with the same cruel arrogance that marked all the men in his family. When he saw the mixed group waiting for him, his expression darkened with rage. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice carrying across the desert silence. Chief Manuelito stepped forward, his weathered hands empty but his voice strong with authority. "This is peace, Captain. We invite you to join us in choosing hope over hatred." Morrison's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "Peace you call harboring fugitives and consorting with savages peace. I call it humanity," Harper replied, moving to stand beside the Apache chief. "And I call it the future, if we're wise enough to embrace it." "The only future these animals have is extinction," Morrison snarled, "and anyone who stands with them shares their fate." He raised his hand to signal the attack, but before he could give the order, something unexpected happened. From within the ranks of soldiers, voices began to speak up in protest. "Sir," called out a young sergeant, "there are white civilians down there, women and children." "Traitors and collaborators," Morrison snapped. "They've made their choice." "With respect, sir," another soldier said, "our orders were to eliminate hostile Apache. These people don't look hostile to me." Morrison's face purpled with rage as he realized that his own men were questioning his authority. The sight of Apache and white standing together as equals was challenging everything they had been taught about the natural order of things. "You will follow orders," he shouted, "or face court-martial for insubordination." But the damage was done. Doubt had crept into the ranks, and with it came the possibility of something that had never existed before in this land, a chance for peace, built on mutual respect rather than imposed by force. Isabella stepped forward, then her voice carrying clearly across the space between the two forces. "Captain Morrison," she called out, "I am Isabella Harper, daughter of the mayor of Silver Creek. I stand here of my own free will as a bridge between two peoples who have suffered too long under the weight of hatred and misunderstanding. You stand there as a traitor to your own race." Morrison replied coldly. "I stand here as proof that love is stronger than hatred," Isabella shot back. "That understanding is possible if we have the courage to try." Around her, she could see both Apache and white nodding their agreement. These people had found something precious in their brief time together, a glimpse of what the world could be if fear and prejudice didn't rule their hearts. "Enough of this nonsense," Morrison snarled, raising his pistol. "I'll end this farce with one bullet." But before he could fire, another voice rang out across the desert morning. "Stand down, Captain Morrison," by order of the territorial governor. Every head turned toward the sound, and Isabella gasped as she saw Lieutenant Morrison riding toward them, his young face grim with purpose and a folded document in his hand. "What are you doing here, boy?" Captain Morrison demanded of his younger brother. "Delivering new orders," the lieutenant replied, holding up the document. Governor Williams has received word from Washington. The Army is to take no action against Apache civilians without explicit federal authorization. That's impossible, the captain protested. My orders came directly from the governor's office. Your orders have been superseded, Lieutenant Morrison said firmly. There's been too much attention from Eastern newspapers, too many questions asked in Congress. The policy has changed. Isabella felt her knees nearly buckle with relief as she realized what had happened. Somehow word of their situation had reached people with the power to intervene. The massacre had been prevented, at least for now. But Captain Morrison wasn't ready to give up his moment of glory. I don't believe you, he snarled. This is some trick, some deception cooked up by these traitors. Then you can explain your insubordination to a military tribunal, Lieutenant Morrison replied coolly. Because I'm ordering you to stand down, and I have the authority to do it. For a moment, the two brothers faced each other across a chasm of ideology and conscience. The captain's hand tightened on his weapon, and Isabella held her breath, wondering if blood would flow after all. Then slowly, Captain Morrison lowered his gun. The fight went out of him as he realized that his moment of revenge had slipped away, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. This isn't over, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. Yes, Isabella said, her voice carrying a quiet strength that surprised even her. It is. The hatred ends here with us with this moment. We choose love instead. As the soldiers began to withdraw, Isabella felt Kaelan's arm slip around her waist. Together they had done something that had seemed impossible just days before they had turned love into a force for peace, transforming personal passion into social change. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of possibility. There would be other challenges, other battles to fight against those who preferred hatred to hope. But they would face those challenges together as partners in love and allies in peace. The sun climbed higher over the desert, warming the faces of Apache and white alike, as they stood together in the morning light. It was a new day in more ways than one, and Isabella knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She had surrendered to love, and in doing so had discovered something even more powerful, the courage to build bridges where others saw only walls, and the wisdom to choose hope over fear. The world was still a dangerous place, but it was also a place where miracles could happen if people were brave enough to believe in them.